And Charles, sticking with food security then?
Yeah, very closely related, but really, as Sandy articulates, the question is what is either the response of the public or indeed government to any of this? And this concerns what's being referred to as a wheat strike. The farmers encouraged by the Farming Forum to withhold wheat supplies from flour millers, which has been described as being likely to give rise to a shortage of bread and other sort of bakery products in the shops, particularly in relation to Easter weekend coming up and, of course, hot cross buns and that kind of thing. Now, I will be playing the ball and not the man, but it does bear relation to think that the person behind this is a chap called Clive Bailey, who, as I say, has been managing the Farming Forum, and it was he that was coordinating gatherers and protesters in London back in November 2024 and inviting people to register via a digital platform. Now, it was said at the time that the data was not being held, but nonetheless, there seem to be a few question marks around that. Now, another person who's been involved in this is a chap called Olly Harrison, just shown there on the tweet. And obviously this has been pushed out by some of the sort of the usual channels. So we're just going to have a look at what he himself, Olly Harrison, says about the intent behind this withholding of wheat.
You might be wondering why bread and hot cross buns are being short at shops at the moment, and I'll tell you why. Because milling wheat is staying on farms. Farmers that are growing milling wheat have gone on strike from the 1st of April. They will not be loading any trucks with milling wheat, and we're probably going to run out of flour, which will result in running out of hot cross buns and bread. So if you're wondering why the shelves are empty, get onto your local MP and say you need to help these farmers out. You can't carry on putting them out of business. It's not good. So yeah, if there's ration bread and cakes and hot cross buns, it's the politicians' fault. It's not our fault. We can't carry on longer or we won't be in business.
Now, I can't be sure exactly who came up with the idea or indeed what sort of take-up there's been from farmers and what the effect will be either with the millers or with the shelves in shops and supermarkets. But there do seem to have been a number of considerations that have not been taken into account, one of which is the sort of legacy effect of the poor harvest last year and indeed the effect of the environmental land management schemes that have been introduced by the previous Conservative government and then brought in and indeed changed recently by the Labour government. So we have the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board here stating that there's likely to be an increase in imports by 13%, which equates to about 2.75 million tonnes of wheat this year. So the point there is that in actual fact, if it were necessary, it seems possible to imagine that this shortfall in wheat from UK producers could easily be augmented by imports, which of course would entirely nullify any attempt at protest via that. But also, it's worth pointing out this doesn't actually affect the government, not even one bit. But it seems to be in direct response. What he's referring to is the instant withdrawal of the Sustainable Farming Incentive, SFI, and the inheritance tax changes that were made in the autumn budget. But the point with this is that SFI was not a food growing scheme in the first place. The whole point of it was that it was supposed to take land out of food production in order to supposedly benefit the environment, with the effect that 107% increase in uncropped arable land became an almost immediate consequence as the scheme was oversubscribed, which is why it's been stopped. So it's almost as though these people are wanting to have it both ways by complaining about a scheme that's been stopped, but also suggesting that food should be withheld. So it really all is leading to the same place, which is, as he quite rightly identifies, a food shortage. Now, the problem with that is that it's an absolute gift to the government because it illustrates that there is an emergency that the government needs to take control of, and that in itself is a problem. Now, the other thing I want to draw attention to is Olly Harrison himself. I've showed this before. His pinned tweet on Twitter reads, the number of people who've died from glyphosate exposure in 40 years, 0. Number of people died from consuming GMOs in 22 years, 0. It carries on in this vein. The point is that he is very much invested in what's become a traditional and very destructive form of industrial agrochemical farming. Now, I would just like to point out that the safety data sheet from Bayer, the manufacturers of glyphosate via many of their Roundup products, runs entirely contrary to what he says. And I think people just really do need to think about this. I've just drawn out a few. To humans, it causes serious eye irritation. I mean, that frankly be the least of your worries. It's toxic to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. It's toxic to honeybees, our chief pollinators, and it talks about avoiding risks to human health and the environment. So this is not a good thing to be splashing about the place. And if you consider that it is applied very liberally to crops and indeed to exactly the sort of wheat he's pointing out that's going to flour millers, how is your body supposed to cope with that? First of all, it's coated in a highly toxic chemical, but secondly, that is a chemical that the crop itself is able to withstand because of various processes via either hybridization or gene editing that it's undergone. So I think that's, in relation to human health, that is something that people really do need to consider. On that score, the government have just reinforced the point that they made a change to the law in November. This is to do with birth defects, which they say are going to be prevented by fortifying flour with folic acid. Now, the drama with folic acid, they say here that they're going to fortify bread with it, reducing neural tube defects by 20% in the UK. How on earth can they know that? The answer, of course, is they can't. The NHS here saying about folic acid is available on prescription. Your doctor will explain how often to take it. Exactly like fluoride, it is a medication. It therefore requires a dosage that is appropriate to the person taking it. So to apply it liberally or in whatever quantity to a bread that you cannot regulate the consumption of is reckless in the extreme, and people should be made very, very aware of that. So we've got glyphosate and folic acid coming together. Also, to refer back to the state of emergency that the government may easily extract from this and therefore start to dictate in a way that they might not be doing now. I point back to the National Preparedness Commission, which has had specific insight into the idea that there is going to be a food security. Of course, we should bear in mind that food security is really a completely nebulous concept anyway in terms of national self-sustainability, because we have had not really more than about 50% capability for a long, long time, certainly not 100% capability since the 18th century. So this is sort of slightly arbitrary debating. Now, I would just like you to draw your attention in closing to a couple of things. First of all, I've written an article that's been on the UK Column website for a little while, but suggesting really that the chief target here is supranational. This is exactly what Sandy has been talking about. This is the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and so much else besides, but also the spectre of climate change and, of course, the nonsense that's behind that. And also, please go to the farming section on the UK Column website, where there's so much more about all of this sort of thing.
Thank